The shove came so fast that, for a half-second, none of us understood what we had just seen. One moment the guardsman stood at the east gate of Ardenholt Palace exactly as he had stood all morning, rifle grounded, white gloves bright in the noon light. The next he was being driven sideways by two flat palms against his chest, and a voice was barking, move it, you're in my shot." I had my phone out for a photo of the gilded ironwork. Instead I caught the whole thing, and I have watched that clip more times than I can count, because I was there, 6 feet away, and I still do not fully believe how it ended. My name does not matter much to this. I am a retired transit dispatcher, 61 years old, in the capital that week to see my daughter's new flat, and I had wandered down to the palace forecourt the way every visitor does, to look at the long line of guardsmen and the great stone arch and the lions carved into the gate. There were maybe 200 of us pressed along the painted line on the cobblestones, the line you are not supposed to cross, all of us holding phones up like a field of little glass mirrors. It was an ordinary, sun-warm, ordinary day. And then the convoy of black cars rolled up to the curb, and everything stopped being ordinary. The man who got out of the middle car I recognized before I knew I recognized him. You would too. He had that face that lives on 100 million screens, the soft-styled hair, the bright white teeth, the practiced way of stepping out of a vehicle as if a camera were always waiting, which, for him, one always was. A famous influencer. The kind of man whose entire fortune is built on being looked at. He wore a pale tailored coat that probably cost more than my car, and a watch that caught the sun and threw it back at us. And he moved through the crowd sudden gasp the way a swimmer moves through water easily, expecting it to part. 2 paces behind him came the other man, and that man I will remember until I die. He was enormous. Not tall so much as built, a slab of a person in a tight black jacket, sunglasses, an earpiece coiling down into his collar, hands the size of dinner plates. He had the rolling, deliberate walk of a man who has spent his life being the largest object in any room and has decided that is a kind of authority. Muscle for hire, a bodyguard. He scanned the crowd once, dismissed us, and put his whole attention on clearing a path for his client to the most photogenic spot on the entire forecourt, which happened to be directly in front of the guardsman at the east gate. I want to describe the guardsman now, while the convoy is still settling and before the trouble starts, because the contrast is the whole of it. He was young, I think, though the bearskin and the chin strap make them all look like carved figures, ageless and identical. But you could see, if you looked, the things the uniform could not hide. A small nick of an old scar through one eyebrow, the deep tan of a man who has spent real time outdoors in hard places, the absolute economy of his stillness. He did not shift his weight. He did not glance at the famous man. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance, on a point above all our heads, and his breathing was so slow and even that the brass buttons down his red tunic seemed not to move at all. The crowd churned and pointed and called the influencer's name. The guardsman might have been the gate itself, stone and iron, part of the architecture. The influencer reached the painted line, turned his back to the gate, and lifted his phone for a photograph, the guardsman framed over his shoulder like a prop. That by itself was nothing. They all do it. The guardsmen are used to being scenery. It is half the reason the tourists come. If the famous man had taken his photo and moved on, I would have forgotten the whole afternoon by supper. But the angle was not perfect. The famous man frowned at his screen, turned, considered the gate, and decided that the guardsman was standing 2 feet too far to the left. Hey, he snapped his fingers at the soldier, not even looking at him, looking at his own phone. Hey, soldier, shuffle over, you're crowding the arch. The guardsman did not move. Of course he did not move. He could not move. That was not in his power any more than the lions on the gate could pad over to make room. The crowd around me laughed, a little nervously, because we all knew this game, and we all knew the soldier would not so much as blink, and there is a thrill in watching a powerful person fail to get what they want from a man who is forbidden to give it. But the famous man was not used to that thrill being at his own expense. He lowered the phone and really looked at the guardsman for the first time, and I watched his handsome face do a small, ugly thing. He was not angry exactly. He was puzzled, the way the very rich and the very famous are puzzled by a locked door, a genuine inability to understand why the world has not arranged itself. I said move, he repeated, and now he was smiling the smile he used for the camera, except there was nothing behind it. Come on, 2 steps. It's for the content. People want to see this. He gestured at the crowd, at our phones, as if he were doing the guardsman a favor by including him. The guardsman stared through him at the middle distance and said nothing and moved not 1 inch, and the still air seemed to tighten, the way it does before weather. A woman from his entourage tried, gently, to save him from himself. She was young and harried, with a lanyard and a tablet clutched to her chest, the sort of assistant who spends her days smoothing the path in front of a difficult man, and she leaned in and murmured something I could not hear but could read well enough from the way she angled her body away from the crowd, the way her free hand made a small flattening gesture. Let it go, the angle's fine. We'll fix it later, please. He waved her off without looking at her. He had, I realized, an audience of millions in his pocket and a live one of 200 on the cobblestones, and a man like that does not back down in front of an audience. Backing down was the one thing his whole life had trained him never to do. He had built an empire on never being the one who blinked, and somewhere along the way he had stopped being able to tell the difference between a camera he should perform for and a man he should simply have left alone. So instead of letting it go, he did the thing that small men with large platforms do. He decided to make a lesson of it. He decided that this silent soldier, who would not give him 2 steps, was going to be content, proof of how the little people resist a man of stature, proof of his own unflappable charm in the face of rudeness. He half turned to his own phone, lined up the shot so that both he and the unmoving soldier were in frame, and the crowd, and started talking to his millions in that warm, confiding voice, narrating a story in which he was the reasonable one, and the soldier was the obstacle. And you could see him relax into it, comfortable again, back on familiar ground, certain the situation was now under his control simply because he had turned it into content. He was wrong, but he had not yet had the experience that would teach him so. That experience was about 3 minutes away, and it was going to cost him everything. And when even the live stream did not produce the moment he wanted, when the soldier remained a wall and not a foil, the famous man turned to his bodyguard, and he said the words that started all of it. "Bron, get him to move." I have thought a great deal since about that moment, about how casual it was. He did not say it like an order to do something serious. He said it the way you would ask someone to nudge a chair out of the way, a small inconvenience, a thing handled by the help. He had already turned back to his phone, already checking the light, fully confident that the obstacle was about to be removed, because obstacles were always removed for him. He never once considered that there might be a reason a man stands so still, or that the stillness itself might be a kind of strength he had never in his soft, applauded life come up against. The bodyguard Bron rolled his neck once, set his jaw, and stepped over the painted line. A ripple went through the crowd. Some people stepped back. A woman near me said, "He can't do that, can he?" And nobody answered her because we did not know, because none of us had ever seen anyone actually do it. The big man planted himself in front of the guardsman, close, too close, chest to chest, blocking out the sun so that a shadow fell across the red tunic. He pointed one thick finger at the soldier's nose. "You heard him," Bron said, low, the voice of a man who settles things with his hands. "Move. Now or I move you." The guardsman looked through him, past him, as if the slab of a man simply were not there at all. And I swear to you, that infuriated the bodyguard more than any insult could have, because his whole life and livelihood was built on people being afraid of his size, and here was a man a third his weight who would not even grant him the dignity of being seen. So he did exactly what he had threatened. He put both palms flat on the guardsman's chest and shoved him, hard, sideways, the way you would shove a heavy door. And the camera in my hand caught all of it. Here is the thing nobody who watches the clip later understands until I explain it. The guardsman did not stumble because he was weak. He stumbled because he was holding his ground in the only way a man in his position is permitted to. He went sideways 3 or 4 staggering steps, his boots scraping the cobblestones, the rifle butt knocking against the stone, and then he caught himself, planted, and came back to his post. Came back to the exact spot he had occupied to the inch and resumed his stance, eyes forward, breathing slow as if nothing at all had happened. He did not raise a hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his eyes. He simply returned to where his duty said he must stand and stood there, and the shadow of the big man fell across him again. The crowd's noise changed. The nervous laughter was gone now. I heard the woman near me draw a sharp breath, and somebody behind me said, "Are you filming? Tell me you're filming." And a dozen phones that had been aimed at the famous man swung as one to the soldier and the slab in black who loomed over him. The famous influencer noticed none of it. He was still fussing with his phone, still half turned away, and when he saw out of the corner of his eye that the guardsman had drifted back into frame, he made a small, irritated sound. "Braun, seriously, he's back, will you?" He flapped a hand. "Just hold him there or something, 2 minutes. I need the shot." Hold him there, as if the man were a stubborn dog on a leash. The bodyguard took that as license. He stepped in again, and this time he did not shove. This time he reached up and clamped one enormous hand around the guardsman's upper arm, on the red wool just below the shoulder, and gripped, and began to haul him bodily to the side, dragging, the heels of the soldier's boots furrowing the cobblestone, the chin strap of the bearskin pulling taut against his jaw. I've replayed those 4 seconds 100 times. You can see, in my footage, the exact moment the guardsman's discipline became something visible, something almost frightening in its restraint. Because here was a trained soldier, you could see it now in the set of his shoulders, the way his free hand stayed open and down and deliberately empty, being physically assaulted in front of 200 witnesses, and choosing, second by second, not to break. A man being manhandled who could clearly, obviously have ended it, and did not. Because the moment he raised a hand against a civilian without command, the story would become about him, about a soldier striking a man at the gate, and he knew it, and he would not give them that. So he let himself be dragged, his jaw tight, his eyes forward, and the cost of that restraint was written in every line of him. I have to tell you what it did to the crowd, because the crowd is part of this story, and I was part of the crowd. We had come for a postcard. We had come to make a stoic soldier crack a smile, to photograph the lions and the bearskins and post that we had been here. And in the space of 2 minutes that whole holiday mood had curdled into something none of us had bargained for. The man beside me, a big-bellied fellow in a sun hat, had gone pale and tight around the mouth. The woman who had asked, "He can't do that, can he?" had her hand pressed flat to her chest. A young father a little way down the line had quietly turned his small son around by the shoulders so the boy faced the other way, toward the lions, away from the ugliness, and crouched to point at the carved stone and talk in a low, cheerful voice about mayonnaise and paws, shielding him from it. And I thought, that is what a decent man does when something turns wrong in front of his child. He puts himself between. And I thought with a strange clarity that the soldier was doing the same thing, putting himself between the provocation and the disgrace of the guard, between what he was permitted to do and what he was capable of doing, standing in that narrow gap and refusing to step out of it no matter how hard the world pushed. Because do not mistake it, he could have ended the bodyguard in a heartbeat. You did not need to be a soldier yourself to see it. There was a coiled, unhurried competence in the way he held himself even while being dragged, a sense that the larger man was handling something far more dangerous than he understood, the way a boy might shake a sleeping bear by the ear and brag to his friends. The guardsman's free hand stayed open and down. That open hand was the whole story. A closed fist is a decision. An open hand, held open on purpose while a stranger hauls you across stone by your tunic, is discipline made flesh. I have never in my life seen restraint that looked so much like power. The bodyguard hauled him a full pace and a half before the rifle butt caught on a raised cobblestone and the drag stalled, and Braun grunted and reset his grip and yanked again, and the chin strap bit into the soldier's jaw, and a low, ugly sound went through the crowd, a sound I had never heard a crowd make, 200 people deciding all at once that they did not like what they were watching, and that someone needed to make it stop. That was when the sergeant arrived. I had not even noticed the second guardsman, off to the side near the gatehouse, a slightly older man with a sergeant's bearing and a sharper, more mobile attention than the statues at the posts. He had been watching. The instant the bodyguard laid hands on the soldier the first time, the sergeant had already moved, already keyed something on the radio at his collar, and now he came across the forecourt at a fast walking pace that was somehow more alarming than a run, straight-backed, purposeful, his voice cutting across the crowd like a blade. "Hands off that soldier. Step back now." The bodyguard Braun did not let go. He half turned, still gripping the guardsman's arm, and sized up the sergeant the way he had sized up the crowd and dismissed him the same way. "We're just clearing a shot," he said. 2 minutes. "Relax. Take your hand off him," the sergeant said, and he had stopped now, a careful arm's length away, and his voice had dropped into something flat and final that I felt in my chest. "Or you will be removed from this forecourt in restraints. You are laying hands on a member of the household guard on royal ground. Think very carefully about the next thing you do." And the famous influencer finally looked up from his phone. You could see the calculation cross his face. For one instant I thought he might do the smart thing, the human thing, might call his man off and apologize and slip away in his black cars, with the afternoon only slightly bruised. He was famous, after all, and famous people have handlers and lawyers and 1,000 ways to make a thing go away. He could have walked. Instead he laughed. He laughed and he lifted his phone and he turned it on the sergeant, and I understood with a sick little jolt exactly what kind of man we were dealing with. He was not going to defuse this. He was going to monetize it. He swung the camera between the sergeant and his own face and said, in the bright, intimate voice he used to talk to his millions, guys, look at this. You're seeing this. The Royal Guard's getting aggressive because we want a photo on a public street. This is the kind of thing." He turned the lens on the guardsman still pinned in his bodyguard's grip. "This is the kind of overreach we deal with. We pay for this with our taxes. Tell them, Braun." "He won't even move for a picture." "He won't move," Braun agreed, and shook the guardsman's arm once like a man rattling a locked door. The sergeant's face did not change at all. He turned his head a few degrees and spoke, low, into the radio at his collar, and I could not hear the words, but I saw the bodyguard's eyes flick to that small motion, and for the first time something uncertain moved behind the sunglasses. Even the slab understood, on some animal level, that a man does not speak so calmly into a radio unless help is already coming. What none of us in the crowd knew yet, what I would only learn afterward when the footage was everywhere and the whole story came out, was who exactly was about to come through that gate. "Last time," the sergeant said, "let him go." The famous man, drunk on his own live stream, leaned into the moment instead. "Or what?" he said, grinning at his phone. "What are you going to do, march me to jail? You can't touch us. You know who he is." He jerked a thumb at himself. "You know how many people are watching this right now?" "More than you'd like," the sergeant said. "Believe me." And then the gate began to open. Not the great ceremonial gate with the lions, the one the tourists photograph. A smaller iron door set into the wall beside the gatehouse, the kind you would not even notice unless you saw it swing. Out of it came men. Not a crowd of them, not a dramatic rush. Just four, walking in a tight wedge with that same unhurried, terrible certainty the sergeant had. And at their head, a man in a different uniform than the ceremonial guardsman, darker, plainer, with a holstered sidearm and a senior officer's insignia at the collar, and the kind of weathered, level face that has given a great many hard orders and watched them carried out. The crowd parted for them without being asked. We just stepped back. Even the bravest filmers among us lowered their phones a little, instinctively, the way you do when something stops being a spectacle and starts being real. The officer walked straight up to the situation and took it in with one sweep of his eyes. The guardsman with a stranger's hand clamped on his tunic, the famous man with his phone up, the sergeant standing his line, and he did not raise his voice at all when he spoke. He did not need to. That was the lesson of the whole afternoon in the end. The quietest man on the forecourt was the most powerful one, and it took the loud men far too long to learn it. "You have your hand," the officer said to Braun, "on a soldier of the household guard. You have laid hands on him twice in front of the public on the sovereign's ground. You will release him on the count of 3, and then you will place your own hands behind your back, or my men will place them there for you." 1. For the first time the bodyguard hesitated. I watched the certainty drain out of that huge frame. He was a man who understood force, and he had just done the arithmetic that men like him are very good at. 4 trained men, the officer's holstered weapon, the unhurried calm, the gate the help had come from. This was not a tourist he could intimidate. This was an institution, and the institution had arrived. 2. "Braun," the famous man said, and his voice had a new note in it, a thin high note under the swagger. "Braun, don't, this is exactly the shot, keep him there, the lawyers will." 3. The bodyguard let go. He let go of the guardsman's arm and stepped back and lifted his own hands, palms out, the universal gesture of a man surrendering. And the slab who had bullied his way across the painted line 10 minutes earlier suddenly looked like exactly what he was. A hired pair of arms with no authority of his own, far from anyone who could protect him, surrounded. 2 of the officer's men moved in and took him by the elbows, professional, unhurried, and turned him toward the small iron door. And Braun went, because there was nothing else to do, his sunglasses askew now, his earpiece dangling, looking back over his shoulder at his client with an expression I can only call betrayed. And the guardsman, the man at the center of all of it, the man who had been shoved and gripped and dragged and put on a live stream as a villain, the guardsman simply squared his shoulders, settled the rifle, lifted his chin and resumed his post, eyes forward, breathing slow, as if the last 10 minutes had been weather that had passed over him and left him exactly as it found him. He did not watch his attacker be led away. He did not look at the famous man. He returned to the middle distance and to his duty, and somehow that was the most powerful thing any of us had seen all day, more powerful than the officer, more powerful than the 4 men. That he could be assaulted and vindicated in the same 10 minutes and let neither one move him an inch. But the famous man was not finished. He thought even now that he held the cards. "You can't arrest him," he said, following a half step after the officer, the phone still up, still broadcasting. "He works for me. He was doing his job. I'm the victim here. That soldier refused a lawful. You're going to want to think about who you're." The officer turned and looked at him, and the look was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was the patient, weary attention of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should have understood it long ago. "Sir," the officer said, "you instructed your employee to lay hands on a member of the guard. We have it on our cameras." He nodded almost gently toward the discreet domes mounted high on the gatehouse wall, the ones none of us had thought about, the ones that had been recording in clean high definition the entire time from 3 angles with timestamps, while the famous man performed his version of events for his phone. "And we have it on theirs." He nodded at us, at the field of glass mirrors, at the 200 of us who had filmed every second. "You did not have a photograph taken. You orchestrated an assault and narrated it to your audience. I would put the phone down now, sir, before you make the case against yourself any stronger than you already have." For one long, beautiful moment, the most famous face in the country had no expression on it at all. The performance simply stopped, like a screen going dark, and underneath it there was only a frightened, ordinary man who had just realized that the rules he had floated above his entire adult life applied to him after all here, on this stone, in front of everyone, and were closing over his head like water. He lowered the phone. His assistant with the lanyard had gone white. She stepped back from him, just slightly, the small involuntary distancing of someone who has just watched the ground shift and is already, instinctively, deciding which side of the crack to stand on. The two black cars idled at the curb, the drivers staring straight ahead, and the rest of the entourage had developed a sudden interest in their own phones, that particular busyness people perform when they do not want to be associated with what is happening 3 feet away. The famous man stood alone in the middle of the forecourt. He had owned 10 minutes earlier, and for the first time in his adult life, there was no one rushing to clear his path or smooth his moment or tell him he was right. There was only the soldier at his post, eyes forward, breathing slow, and the 200 of us, and the cameras on the gatehouse wall, and the cold arithmetic of consequence settling over him. But the recording, his own recording, the live stream he had started to humiliate the guard, was still running. He had forgotten it in his panic. It was still pouring out to his millions of followers in real time, and it would keep running. I would learn later, for another 90 seconds before someone on his team managed to cut the feed, 90 seconds in which his own audience, the people he had summoned to watch him win, watched him lose instead. Watched the great man go quiet. Watched the institution he had mocked stand calm and immovable, while his hired muscle was walked through an iron door. Those 90 seconds were the end of him, though he did not know it yet. Because the clip that mattered was not going to be the polished, flattering version he would have edited and posted on his own terms. The clip that mattered was already out of his hands. It was on 200 phones, and it was on mine, and within the hour it would be on every screen in the country, and the story it told was not the story he had tried to narrate. It told the truth instead. I want to slow down here and tell you what the truth was, because the famous man spent the next several days trying very hard to make it into something else, and I was there, and I will not let him. The truth was a man standing still at a gate, doing a job that asks him to absorb every insult the world can throw and answer none of them, being shoved, gripped, and dragged by a hired stranger twice his size, and choosing at real cost. You could see the cost not to lift a hand, because lifting a hand was exactly what they wanted and exactly what his honor would not allow. The truth was discipline. Not the cold, robotic discipline the tourists imagine when they try to make the guardsmen laugh, but the hard, living, deliberate discipline of a man who knows precisely how much force he is capable of and holds every ounce of it in check, because that is what duty requires. The famous man had mistaken that restraint for weakness. He had spent his life surrounded by people who folded the instant a larger force pressed on them, and he assumed the world was made of such people, and he had finally met a man who was not, and he could not comprehend it, and so he tried to break him, and instead he broke himself against him. That is the truth. The cameras caught it, all of them. By the time I had walked back to my daughter's flat, my own phone was buzzing in a way it had never buzzed in my life. The clip, my clip, the one I had taken without thinking, 6 feet away, was being shared faster than I could understand. By evening it had been viewed millions of times. By the next morning, tens of millions. And it was not the only one. There were the angles from the other tourists. And there were, eventually, the palace's own camera feeds, released cleanly and without comment once the matter became a formal one, showing the whole sequence from 3 positions with the timestamps running, calm and undeniable, the way a thing looks when there is nothing to hide. People are not stupid in the aggregate. They watched the famous man snap his fingers at a soldier. They watched him say, "Braun, get him to move," as casually as ordering a coffee. They watched the bodyguard shove and grip and drag. They watched the soldier hold. And they watched the famous man point his own camera at the institution and try to tell them that he was the victim, while the evidence of exactly the opposite played out behind his own head. There is a particular kind of fury reserved for a powerful person who not only does an ugly thing but films himself doing it and expects to be applauded. The country found that fury, and it pointed it at him. His name, that had been a brand, became a punchline within a day. The clip was set to music. It was captioned in 100 clever ways. The single still image of the guardsman standing straight-backed at his post while the slab in black loomed over him. The image, it turned out, that I had captured at the exact right instant, became a kind of symbol, printed and reprinted, the immovable man and the bully, discipline and arrogance, and underneath it people wrote the things they believed about duty and respect and getting what you deserve. I am not a sentimental man, but I will tell you that it moved me to see it, to have been the one holding the phone, to know that for once the right thing had been seen by everyone and could not be unseen. And then the consequences began to arrive, the way they do, slowly and then all at once. The bodyguard, Braun, was charged. Common assault, the formal language said, against a member of the household guard on royal ground, an aggravating circumstance that made it considerably more serious than a scuffle in a bar. There was no defending it. The footage was total. His own client's live stream had recorded him admitting what he was doing in real time. He had been a man who hired out his size, and now his size and his name were attached to a crime that every employer in his line of work could watch on a loop, and no one hires a bodyguard whose face is famous for the wrong reason. He was finished in that trade. The slab who had spent his life being the largest object in the room discovered that the room could be a courtroom, and that in a courtroom size is the one thing that counts for nothing at all. But it was the famous man who fell furthest because he had climbed the highest, and because, this is the part the crowd savored most, he had done it to himself on his own camera for his own audience. He tried, of course, to control it. That is the instinct of a man who has built his life on controlling the image. The morning after, he posted a long, polished apology video, lit beautifully, his voice soft and wounded, in which he explained that there had been a misunderstanding, that he had the deepest respect for the armed forces, that his security team had acted without his knowledge in the heat of a chaotic moment, that he himself had been frightened and overwhelmed. It was a good performance. It would have worked 10 years ago before everyone carried a camera. It did not work because we had all watched him say, "Braun, get him to move," with our own eyes. We had watched him laugh. We had watched him narrate the assault to his followers and call the soldier the aggressor. The apology, set beside the footage, did not look like contrition. It looked like a man caught, and a man caught lying about being caught, and it did more damage than saying nothing would have done. The video was taken down within hours. By then it had been saved, clipped, and dissected 10,000 times. The brands went next, and they went fast. A man who sells his own likeness for a living is only as valuable as the affection people feel when they see his face, and overnight the affection had curdled into something else. The watch company that had paid him a fortune to wear the watch that caught the sun on the forecourt quietly ended the arrangement. The clothing line whose pale tailored coat he had worn issued a careful statement about shared values. The travel company, the supplement company, the whole gleaming apparatus of sponsorship that had hung off his name, one by one, in the flat language of people protecting themselves, they stepped away. His management agency, the one that had put the lawyers on the phone that very afternoon, dropped him by the end of the week. The followers he had summoned to watch him win the soldier did not so much abandon him as turn, which is worse. The same audience that had made him began, with great energy, to unmake him. The brand that was his name, that had been worth a staggering amount of money on the morning he stepped out of that black car, was worth nothing by the following weekend. He had monetized everything in his life, and in 10 minutes at a gate, he had spent it all on a photograph he never even got to take. There was one moment in all of it that stayed with me more than the rest, and it had nothing to do with money. A few days after, a clip surfaced of the famous man at an event he had been booked for long before any of this, a glossy launch of some kind, the sort of thing he had glided through 100 times. He arrived the way he always arrived, stepping out of a car as if a camera were waiting, and the cameras were waiting, but the faces around them had changed. No one called his name with delight. People filmed him, yes, the way you film a wreck on the roadside, and as he walked the short carpet you could see him register it, second by second, the way I had watched the bodyguard register the arithmetic of 4 trained men. The affection was gone. He smiled at it anyway, that bright practice smile, and it sat on his face like something pinned there, and a voice from the crowd, just one, not even unkind, said clearly, "Get him to move." And someone laughed. And then more of them laughed, the same 3 words coming back to him from a stranger's mouth, his own casual cruelty handed back. And the smile finally came off, and he turned and got back in the car, and that was the last anyone saw of him at that kind of event for a very long time. He had taught the whole country a phrase, and the country was going to make him hear it for years. I followed the assault case to its end, because I had given a statement, and because by then it felt like mine. The bodyguard pleaded guilty in the end. There was no other move on the board, and the court treated the aggravating circumstance with the seriousness it deserved, and he was sentenced, and the sentence was reported, and the reporting carried the famous man's name in every line, because the famous man's instruction was on the record, on the live stream, in his own bright, confident voice. He was not charged himself. Instructing is a slippery thing, and the law is careful. But there is a court that meets faster than any judge, and it had already returned its verdict, and there was no appeal. I think about the guardsman more than I think about either of them. I never learned his name. The guard does not give them out, and I did not ask. He was not made into a celebrity, which I am glad of, because I do not think he would have wanted it. The whole point of him was that he stood for something larger than himself, and a name and a face would have shrunk that. But the palace did one thing quietly, in the way that institutions do their truest business, and I only know of it because the sergeant mentioned it to me when I gave my statement. The soldier was commended, not for fighting he had not fought. He was commended for the opposite, for the restraint, for absorbing an assault on royal ground and refusing to give the provocation what it wanted, for holding the line and the discipline and the honor of the guard intact under hands that meant to break it. The very thing the famous man had filmed as weakness, his own institution recognized as the highest kind of strength. That is the part I tell people when I show them the clip. Not the karma, though the karma was sweet. The commendation. That somewhere in that palace, men who understand exactly what that stillness costs had watched the same footage as the rest of us, and known precisely what they were looking at. I went back to the East Gate before I left the capital. I told myself I was not looking for him, and that was a lie. The guardsmen had changed shifts, of course, and I could not have told one from another under the bearskins, and it did not matter, because they were all the same in the way that mattered. Still, immaculate, eyes forward, absorbing the snapping fingers and the raised phones and the small daily contempt of people who mistake a man who will not move for a man who cannot, and answering none of it. I stood at the painted line, the line I am not supposed to cross, and I did not cross it. I looked at the soldier at the post for a while, and then I put my phone in my pocket, and I did not take a photograph. It seemed like the one decent thing I could offer. A man does not need to raise his voice to be heard, or his hand to be strong. I learned that at 61 on a sun-warm, ordinary day, watching the loudest man in the country lose everything to the quietest. The soldier never said a word. He never had to. He simply stood his ground and let the truth do the rest, and the truth, when everyone is finally watching, has a long memory and a heavy hand. The famous man wanted to be looked at. In the end, he got exactly that. And the man he tried to move is still standing at his post, exactly where his duty says he must, unmoved and unbroken, long after the world has stopped remembering the name of the man who tried.